with you today. We're so thankful to be able to join you once again on this Wednesday evening. We have been discussing for the longest time Samuel, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and we are currently in the book of 2 Samuel, heading toward the end of David's reign. As you remember in Samuel, you will get the sorry, I can't do two things at once. Trying to get better at this. You will remember in 2 Samuel, it starts with David's rise to power in chapters 1 through 11, 1 through 10. Then you have, in that period, you have him first being crowned king of Judah in Hebron, and then he goes to Israel and unites all Israel at Jerusalem in chapters 5 through 10. We talked about how those first 10 chapters are David's rise, and everything after that starts to fall, because it starts there in chapters 11 and 12 with the sin with Bathsheba, Nathan pointing this out. You have the death of their child. Then immediately it goes into the next story in chapter 13 of the rape of Tamar, who is Absalom's brother, which is Absalom is David's son, and Amnon is also David's son, the second son. He falls in love with Tamar, eventually does rape her against her consent, and then Absalom will end up putting Amnon to death. So there is the death of Amnon, there's the death of the child, there's the death of Amnon, and you can start to see David's family starting to unravel. Absalom's taken out into exile, and after some time, of watching David weep, Joab says, "Stop it! Just bring your son back already." And through a ruse of a wise woman coming and talking about her two sons, David agrees to have Absalom brought back. The problem with Absalom being brought back is that he's not allowed to see David at all until the very end of chapter 14, where finally Absalom burns down part of Joab's crop in order to get his attention. And so he finally meets David, and they kiss and they hug and they make up and all those kind of things. But as that progresses, as you move into chapter 15 now, Absalom is kind of bored, for lack of a better word. And so he goes down to Hebron, and he takes with him a bunch of men. It starts with 50, grows to 200, and he takes them down there, and he makes himself king at Hebron. And everybody around him didn't necessarily know that was going to happen, but it happened anyway, and so he makes good there. Now, David hears this, and that worries David, and we need to get out of town. Why is that true? Well, if you look in the king of Judah, up at the top of that list is where David goes to install himself at Hebron. That's where Saul himself was first installed. So if you can get yourself to be king of Judah, that's a long way to go. So Absalom's going down. I've got to rule Judah. David sees the writing on the wall. It's not too long before he's going to push for the crown, and so I got to get out of here. David's men say, "No, we're fighters. Let's fight. Let's do this." David says, "Nope, not going to fight with my son. I'm out of here." And David flees, and it says that he actually goes out into the wilderness, that he leaves the promised land. There's specific language in there to say that he's left the promise to go elsewhere, and he's afraid that God no longer favors him. He's lost the Holy Spirit, and so all of that language there is necessary. As he's going out, he does make some deals with the priest. Go back. His servant Hushai says, "No, you go back. I need a spy in the camp. I need to know what's going on there." And so he leaves. And on their way to leaving, he finds Ziba, who is Mephibosheth's caretaker. And David's looking around and says, "Hey, wait, where's Mephibosheth? He should be with me." Ziba says, "No, he stayed in Jerusalem. He's going to be with Abner now. He didn't want to come." So David said, "Okay, well, everything that was given to him is now yours. So that happens. And then finally, there's this guy named Shimei who just starts pelting David with stones over and over and over again. And David's humiliated, walking away from his kingdom. And he at this point, he just doesn't know what to do. And he's willing to accept the punishment and the consequences of whatever the Lord might put upon him. So that sort of leaves us in the middle of chapter 16, where Absalom becomes king of Israel and David is exiled. And you start to see these patterns here where David is king of Judah, now Absalom is king of Judah, where David was king of Israel, now Absalom is king of Israel, and David is exiled. And we stopped midway through chapter 16, and so that's where we're going to pick up here as we begin our Bible study together. 2 Samuel chapter 16, we're going to start in verse 15 where we left off. It says, "Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came from Jerusalem." That is, down from Hebron they came. And Ahithophel, who I said last week was Bathsheba's father or Uriah's father, I couldn't remember which, and yes, I went back and did my research. Yes, Bathsheba is the grandfather of Bathsheba. Eliam is his son. Eliam births Bathsheba. Eliam is one of the mighty men of valor that fights for David. And Eliam gets Uriah, his son-in-law, to join in with the mighty men as well. So that's how that all works out. Basically, that this guy Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather. And Ahithophel was David's counselor for a long time. Sometimes they had good words to say to each other. Sometimes they didn't. If you look in the traditions of the Hebrew rabbis, they often disagreed. And especially you can imagine how things went after it found out that David had actually slept with Bathsheba. But the scriptures mention two great oracles. The first one, Balaam, and the second one, Ahithophel. That these people were sought for their advice, as opposed to some of the other judges that we had. But the problem with these two is they didn't always get it right. And we're going to see that as it plays forth as we go through. Then Hushai the Archite. Now remember, Hushai the Archite is David's friend who he wanted to go with David, and David said, "No, I need a spy in the camp, so you need to stay there." So he's David's confidant. It says, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king, long live the king." So Absalom says to Hushai, "So this is the love you show your friend? If he's your friend, why didn't you go with him?" That Absalom knows the relationship between Hushai and David, and so he's a little concerned. Like, you betray your friendship that quickly that you're going to side with me when you've been with my dad all this time? There's something that doesn't smell right here. Verse 18, Hushai says to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the Son, just as I serve the Father? So I will serve you." So Hushai basically says, the anointing has left David. I am with Israel. I am with the God of Israel. I am on whoever God anoints. And so since you are in this seat now, it surely shows that God is favoring you. So that's who I'm going to serve. Just the same way that I served intensely of your father, I'm going to serve you intensely. So, this is, I'm committed. I'm not committed to the man. I'm committed to the God and the country. So this is how he sort of weaves his way in. Verse 20, Absalom says to Ahithophel, who is also there, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" So Ahithophel answers in 21, "Sleep with your father's concubines whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now, it is interesting, is it not, now that we understand that Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather. This has been just waiting for the right opportunity, right? And so through Ahithophel, this oracle, Absalom is going to play out the consequences that God said would happen to David, in that you did this in secret. I'm going to do this in front of the world. I'm going to humiliate you in public because of what you've done. And so here it is, happens, and again, it's no accident that Bathsheba's grandfather is saying, you take his concubines the same way he took Uriah, and the same way he took my daughter away from me as well. So, again, they go up on the roof. Is this not where we saw Bathsheba? So the author is really trying to connect these two, that you see that these two pieces are definitely connected. Now, in those days, verse 23, I guess I should say something about that. You will, before I go into 23, you might remember Abner. Now, Abner was the chief of Ishbosheth. He sort of, after Saul had died, Abner was still sort of in charge. He was part of Saul's army. And at one point, Ishbosheth, who is the only remaining surviving person of Saul's lineage, accuses Abner of sleeping with Saul's concubines. So and we don't really know. Now Abner denies it, but it's quite possible that it did indeed happen. And that would have been a sign that Abner is pushing for the throne himself. To sleep with the king's concubines is basically to say, I am now king. And that's what Absalom is doing at this point in front of all of Israel. I am king. These are my concubines, no longer my father. Now, verse 23. Now in those days, the advice of Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. So again, this oracle is very important. And kings would have consulted, obviously, different counselors. And just in the same way that he would seek God, he would seek Ahithophel. Now, we also know that Ahithophel and David had this weird relationship and semi-tense. And yet David continued to go to the counsel of a person that he knew he had hurt, and could even give him unwise advice, even the opposite advice than maybe he would want. Which is a good thing for David, because David understands that I must surround myself with people who don't think like me. It's very important for leaders to make sure that they don't get rid of all the people who don't think like them. Good leaders need to draw those people in close and listen, because we always need to hear the other side. We get in our hush harbors, our echo tanks, and we just hear and repeat the stuff that we know the people who believe like we do. Yeah, we believe that, and we just kind of keep that going. But it's very important that we listen to the other side of the argument, because there's a reason somebody stands on the other side. So again, David continues to take this advice. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice, that it was from God. Chapter 17, verse 1. Ahithophel says to Absalom, "Now I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed." This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. This was indeed a good plan. Now you remember, he started with 50, takes 200 down to Hebron, and now Ahithophel tells Absalom take 12,000. So we've gone 50, 200 to 12,000. Absalom is gaining power quickly, and now is the time to capitalize it. David is weak. David thinks that he's already lost the throne. So now like he'll probably even give himself up. You just go out and kill him now. And this plan seemed good to Absalom and good to the elders. But Absalom in verse 5 says, summon also Hushai the Archite so we can hear what he has to say as well. Now again, here's a leader who says, I need to hear both sides. I can't just listen to one. Now this one's going to actually get Absalom in trouble because he doesn't understand that Hushai is going to give him bad advice for Absalom, good advice for David. So Hushai comes in, and again he treats this in the same level. David said Ahithophel's, yeah, that's the word of the Lord. Absalom saying, yeah, that might be the word of the Lord, but I need to confirm that word of the Lord, so I'm going to ask Hushai. Verse 6, when Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion. Verse 7, Hushai replied to Absalom, the advice Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. You know your father and his men, they are fighters, fierce as a wild bear when they rob their cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. You know all this. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, like he's probably even looking for you, whoever hears about it will say, there's been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. And then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear, for all Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those with him are brave. Hushai says, yes, you could probably do that, but it could really backfire in your place. Because if you lose, if somehow David attacks you first and you lose, the people will unite and rally around David, and you do not have a chance because they know David. They know his history. They know how he fights. They know that he helped them get the Philistines out of their lands. He knows that he took care of the Arameans. He knows that he took care of also the Ammonites. And so they trust David's fighting degree. They may not trust what he does with personal life, but they trust him with what he does in battle. So Absalom's saying, yeah, okay, now I have to think about this a little bit more. Now it says that this advice is not good at this time. Basically, Hushai is just trying to buy David some time because Hushai knows David right now is not in a good place. And David needs to see something in order for him to kind of like gird up, and he's not prepared. Like if they would go after him right now, David would be done. So Hushai tries to buy him a little bit of time through this advice. Verse 11. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sands on the seashore, be gathered to you, with you yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley until not so much as a pebble is left. So instead of this little group going out right now and challenging, basically Hushai says, no, you need to get everybody on your side first, because there's people who are still deciding whether they want you or David. So you need to get everybody around you, and then they will fight for you, and then they will feel like they're on your side because people are attacking them, and that's how you get people to be on your side. Now, this sounds really good, because if you get all of Israel on your side, then David has no place to hide, and eventually somebody's going to give him up. Verse 14, Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel. It's better than the word of the Lord. They probably should have listened to Ahithophel. For the Lord has determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster upon Absalom. So the Lord is obviously in charge of this bad advice. This is part of the continued disaster that will fall upon David's household. Verse 15, Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar, those are the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now send a message at once to tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the wilderness. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. So this is a warning. They're going to be coming after you. You need to get as far away as you can, regroup, because if they find you now, it's all going to be over. Verse 17, Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying in Rogel. A female servant was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. These are the sons of the priests Zadok and Abiathar, and so they're going to actually do the running to get this message to King David. But a young man, verse 18, saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left at once and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it, and no one knew anything about it. So there's an underground railroad to a certain degree. We're hiding out. This is the Jews in Germany, hiding under floorboards. We're going to make sure that you're okay. So when Absalom's men, in verse 20, come to the woman at the house, they ask, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman answered them, they crossed over the brook. The men searched, but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting, again, if you've been paying attention, it's always the wives who have clued in to what the Lord is doing and are always on the side of the Lord. The men, they have no clue what's going on. The men would have sold them out in a second, but these women have keen insight. And I think that says something to the character of what the Bible is telling us, that there's not many religions back in that day, not many people in that back day would give women credit for all this. And the Bible really wants to make sure it gives women the credit that they deserve. Even though the patriarchal society is going to run rampant for a long time, Jesus always sort of reveals himself through the actions of a woman. Something to think about. So they couldn't find him. They crossed back over they returned to Jerusalem. Verse 21. After they had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, set out and cross the river at once. Get out of here. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you. So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. And by daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. They all crossed the Jordan. They are all now outside of what to their mind is the promised land. Again, there are tribes on that side, many of them not necessarily left because they sort of blended in with Moab and Edom and all those other kind of countries, the Ammonites. But they're out of this land when they cross back out of the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for the house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. Now, that's just a weird story in here. But Ahithophel knows at this point it's no use. I've got nothing. And if they're not following my advice, I know David's going to come back. And David, I gave the advice to the concubines. I'm a dead duck anyway, so might as well put my house in order at this point and be done with it. And so Ahithophel kills himself, and he was buried in his father's tomb. Which, again, if you're suicide, you wouldn't necessarily always be buried with your family, but anyway. Verse 24, David went to Mahanaim. Let me give you that here for a second. I got to take this away. So if you look under the word, where it says Kingdom of Israel, if you look under the word Israel, you'll see Mahanaim. This is where David is heading. He's crossed the Jordan to the east and continues to move in that direction. Absalom also crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel, and Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Why? Because Joab's with David. So Joab is David's commander. Amasa is now Absalom's commander. He was the son of Jether, and he's an Ishmaelite, which is what? Hold on. It goes all the way back to Isaac and Ishmael. This guy is not even one of us. He's an Ishmaelite. Why is he? And he married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. So this is a guy who has some really deep down embedded stuff with Joab, and they don't like each other, and he rises to power. Anyway, the Israelites in verse 26, and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. Gilead again is all that blue that is north of the river where it says Manaheim, and east of the Jordan River. So that northeastern corner is all of Gilead. Verse 27, when David came from Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar, and Brasilia, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain and beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. David is not used to this treatment. Remember David when he was fleeing from Saul? David would ask people for stuff. Can I have something for my men? And he always, well, I don't really have much. I guess you can have this. And here, David is out in the wilderness, the place where he's not supposed to be provided for. And here these men come with all of this stuff to help refresh David. So David is reminded, God has not yet forgotten me. Lo-Debar, remember that's that sort of ghetto from where Mephibosheth was from. So this is like talking about all the displaced places. David once again finds himself among people who have been displaced, and that's usually where David has his most success. When he's sitting in his kingdom with all the people who are supposed to be on his side, he's a mess. But when he gets out there with people, go out to the bars and the drunken sinners, and these are David's people. And interestingly enough, that the people who are not in the promised land treat David better than people who are in the promised land. I think that resonates in a lot of ways with many people. Sometimes the world treats people better than the church does, and there's a problem with that. Certainly the Pharisees would have been an issue as well. 2 Samuel chapter 18 starts in verse 1. David musters the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders and thousands of commanders of hundreds. And David sent out his troop, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. So there's a number of things you see here. First of all, David is no longer the guy being pelted with pebbles. He's re-strengthened this gift, this encouragement, physical encouragement, not just some words, but actually putting some action behind it, so invigorated David to say, my time's not done. Let's rally the troops. Let's get them together. One of these people, Joab is an obvious choice. Abishai is also an obvious choice because he is Joab's brother, and they've been together before. The third is Ittai the Gittite, the Philistine, who David said, you go back. Don't even go back to your hometown. You don't need to be caught up in my mess. And he says, no. I'm going to fight with you. So Ittai the Gittite is part of the three commanders. And the king then tells his troop, I myself will surely march out with you. This is so much different than chapter 11, where when kings go to war, David stayed in Jerusalem. Now the king tells the troop, I myself, this is the old David. This is David and Goliath. This is the David who took the lead and said, is anybody with me? Let's go. He's got the eye of the tiger back. In fact, this could fit like a Rocky V movie, right? This is, David gets broken because he got too comfortable. And he's broken by Absolam, and so he goes back into the old gyms where he used to work out, and he starts learning and training again, and then he goes out into Russia and carries logs across desert plains of snow, and and he gets this stuff back that says, no, I can't be comfortable. If the Lord is going to win, we have to get out of our comfort zone and go fight the battle. And so many times we talk about the Church of Laodicea on Sunday, that sometimes our comfort is actually a great crippling device that leads us into all kinds of other stuff that we shouldn't get involved in. So sometimes it's best to stay on the fringes, to not seek the wealth of the world, to not seek comfortability. Keep that eye of the tiger in you, that fight. Verse 3, but the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. So David says, I'm going to go. And they're going to say, no, you're not. Because if you die, the whole thing falls apart. So we need you back there. We need you governing stuff. We had an event for the area command, and our event coordinator, who's so good, Joelle, she had everything sort of organized, and there was a bunch of volunteers there, and I was one of these, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And over there, Joelle she's working hard. She's opening up water bottles and everything. I had to go to her. I said, Joelle, I need you to do me a favor. She says, what's that? What do you need done? I said, I need you to lead. I need you to tell us what to do. Stop opening water bottles and lead us. And again, so many times as we want to be out there in the lead, and sometimes we're reminded, yes, we want you to be invested. We want you to be with us, sort of. We don't want you staying back in Jerusalem and don't care. But we want you to lead us. We don't necessarily want you to do our work, because then we'll feel like we're not doing anything. Like, we need you to tell us what to do, and we will. That's the best plan. And so they go forth into battle. King answers, I'll do whatever seems best for you. Maybe I'm not a fighter anymore. Maybe my best days are behind us. I ain't as good as I once was. I can certainly identify with that. As much as sometimes I want to get personally involved in things like, oh, my body won't let me do that anymore. So the king stood beside the gate while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absolam for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absolam to each of the commanders. Oh, David, you were so close. You were so close. Be gentle. Like, don't hurt him too hard. Like, I want you to go to war, but can you just kind of like maybe throw some flowers at them instead of shooting them? Like, something. Like, war is war. War, they say, is hell. And no one should ever look for war. But when war is upon us, you can't always, you can't take war lightly. Like, it's either shoot or be shot. And this sort of like cripples the men, because they hear it and they're like, so the very person we're rallying behind to go kill, we're not supposed to kill. How are we going to do that? Studies have been done on the wars of America, and one of the issues is in Vietnam. People are like, I'm not even sure what what we're even doing here. Like, you're getting messages back from the States that you're in an unjust war, and what should I do? And I don't want to hurt people if I'm not supposed to hurt people. And and it just the morale of the troops. If the morale of the troops goes down, you're already lost the war. So says Sun Tzu in The Art of War. Morale is the biggest piece of any army. If you've already thought you've lost, you've already lost the war. Verse 6, David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. This is Ephraim, again, is all the way down to the left of the River Jordan, just above Jerusalem, and maybe even a little northwest of Jerusalem. The forests of Ephraim is where they are fighting. The Israel's troops were routed by David's men. The casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. Remember, 12,000 were supposed to go out. Now 20,000, and even the 20,000 were put to death. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. So this is civil war, right? This is what this looked like, where the war starts brother against brother, and it starts to spread out all over the place until finally there's just so many people dead. And what exactly happened? What's all this for? Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in a tree, and he was left hanging in midair while the mule he was riding kept going. Now this sort of seems like a comedy, right? That is just this guy's riding along and his hair gets caught. Now remember how long Absalom's hair was, and when he cut it, he only cuts it once a year, and when he did cut it, it was like 5 pounds of hair. Like, that's a lot of hair. So it's gotten stuck in this tree, and there he is, dangling from his hair in the tree. When one of the men who saw what happened, verse 10, he told Joab, "I saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." Joab says in verse 11, what, you saw him and you didn't strike him and put him in the ground right there? Like, this is, actually, I wasn't sure if I should kill him because I remember something about being gentle to Absalom, and I don't want to upset David, and I don't know what to do. So I know he's there. So if you want to go see him, maybe you want to do something, or maybe you want to go tell David or whatever. I would have given you 10 shekels, Joab says, or of silver and a warrior's belt. I would have rewarded you because you have done what is right. Stop listening to David. At this point, Joab's like, David's messed up in the head. You should have followed my advice. But the man replied, even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out in my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. No. No, I know David. And I know he knows everything. I don't know how he knows. Remember the woman? You are the angel of God. You seem to know everything. And I don't want to keep that from David. And truth is, if I would have killed him, you would have backed away from me. And this guy killed him. I was gonna save him, David, but this guy killed him. And he would have been dead anyway. The other thing is this part about laying your hands on the anointed. David is very concerned about this with Saul, right? Because David had many times and chances to kill Saul, and David said, I cannot put my hand against the Lord's anointed. There is something about this, leadership that is appointed. We just have to be careful because we criticize a lot and we take darts and throw it at leaders. Certainly we're going to see that over the next, how many months until November and we have an election. We take shots because we can. Whoever is in office is technically the Lord's anointed. Like, they were put there. They may not always act the way we think they should act. They should be held accountable for actions. But personal revenge, personal vendetta, personal angst, sometimes we just need to let that go. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on it. Pray for your leaders, because sometimes they don't know themselves what they're supposed to do, and they have to make a choice between two bad things and are going to get eaten alive by both parties once they've made the decision. There's no winning if you want to be a leader. Go. What's the whole thing John Jordan sent me? Major John Jordan sent me something about if you want to make people happy, go sell ice cream. So there you go. Joab, verse 14, Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart. Not just 1 javelin. I'm taking 3 javelins and plunging them into this guy's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. Like, that had to be awful to know. Here he comes and he's going to kill you. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him and killed him. If the 3 javelins to his heart don't kill you, the armor bearers are going to take care of anything, and they're chopping him to pieces. Verse 16, then Joab sounds the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him in a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now you can see this too, right? Ahithophel commits suicide, is buried with his fathers. Absalom, he's killed by Joab, and they find a pit, they throw him in, couple rocks, done. Nothing remarkable about that grave. The Israelites hear this news. Their leader that they thought was going to take control, nope, they're now gone. Forget it. It's all over. The war is over. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the King's Valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name, and he named that pillar after himself and is called Absalom's monument to this day. Just interesting, right? Like, we have no heir, so we want to make a mark that will stand the test of time, but we're not even there to enjoy it, and who knows what's going to happen to it. It's going to be torn down by somebody at some point, right? We like making monuments to ourselves and for ourselves that make us feel good about what we do. I want to accomplish this. I want these things on my resume. I want to have built these things and put them in my portfolio. Like, all this accomplishment stuff we really chase because we want people to say, look at that guy, he's a great guy. David's family's a mess, all because of one incident where David lost control of his mind. Verse 19, now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, these are the sons of the priests, let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hand of enemies. Verse 20, Joab says, you are not the one to take the news today. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead. Like, you do not want to give David bad news. You don't want to be the messenger that gives bad news. Then Joab says to the Cushite, go and tell the king what you've seen. The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. The Cushite doesn't even have a name. He's expendable. He's the red shirt in Star Trek. Like, he's the one who's going to get killed on the landing party, right? He doesn't have a name. He's a Cushite too. So he is a servant slave that had been brought in from Africa, fighting with the Israelites and doing their bidding. All these Ishmaelites and Cushites, they're all serving in the Israelite armies. But Joab replied, my son, verse 22, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. Like, let's both go. I just need to run. Like, this guy really wants to run. But Joab replied, my son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. Like, it's all bad news. Why would you want to run? He said, come what may, I just want to run. So indeed, this guy is like Forrest Gump, I want to run. And so Joab says, well, then run. I don't know what else to do with you. You go ahead and run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and he outruns the Cushite. When David is sitting between the inner and outer gates, there's a watchman who went up on the roof of the gateway by the wall. And as he looked out, he saw a man running alone. Verse 25, and the watchman called out to the king and reported it. And the king said, if he's alone, that must be good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Verse 26, then a watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, look, another man running alone. The king said, well, he must be bringing good news too. Now, I don't know why this is. I don't know, like big groups, there is a sense where if it's just one person, they want to get the glory kind of thing, and there's usually some kind of reward at the end of the deal. Bad news, nobody necessarily wants to run. Maybe they just want to kind of like saunter back, or maybe misery loves company and we're going to take a few of us to come back and tell the king the bad news. Anyway, king says he must be bringing good news too. Verse 27, the watchman says, it seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man. King said, well, it must be good news. I don't know. Again, I don't know the philosophy behind this, but verse 28, then Ahimaaz called out to the king, all is well. He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king. So the king asked in verse 29, is the young man Absolam safe? Now he doesn't call him his son. He doesn't, he doesn't ask about, well, how are things going? Who's injured? Da, da, da. He asked specifically, is the young man safe? Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me and your servant, but I don't know what it was. Okay, you probably should have stayed around a little longer to catch that. He knew, right? He already knows what's happened. He just didn't want to say it. Verse 30, the king said, well, stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, my lord, the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you. So the king asked the Cushite, is the young man Absolam safe? This is the most important question I have. Cushite replies, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up and harm you be like that man. He's dead. Nope, he's done. It's over. Verse 33, and the king was shaken. That word shaken is very important because it defines David's fall. And here he feels like he's fallen as far as he can. This is the second child that he has lost. And those of you who have lost a child, you understand what that feels like. We can't imagine David's grief at this point. We can't imagine what it would even feel like to have to be going to war against your son as well. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, my son, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Interestingly enough, all the time that Absalom is with David, he never says, "my son." He sends him in exile, or allows him in exile, doesn't call for him back. When he finally is convinced by the wise woman and Joab that he should bring Absalom back, he says, "He can't see me." Then it takes Absalom again setting fires to Joab's, harvest so that he actually comes out and meets with Absalom. And they kiss there and they reconcile. And yet he still never really calls him my son. And, Absalom gets bored and leaves again. So all this time, Absalom was right there, and David never took the time. I don't know if you've ever been to a funeral. I'm sure you have. I find it interesting in all the funerals I've attended over the years that those who have strained relationships with the deceased often have a very often are more insecure at that funeral. They are the ones who are weeping harder because they understand that they didn't have in life and wish things could have been different. So right here it is. You are still living. I'm still living. Let's not let that pass us by. Like if we have sons and daughters and close friends, and let's make that right today, rather than when they die weeping over a casket and there's nothing we can do about it. My son, my son. Chapter 19, Joab was told, chapter 19, verse 1, Joab was told that the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. And the whole and for the whole army, the victory that day was turned to mourning, because on that day the troops heard it said that the king is grieving for his son. A great victory was won here, and there should have been a celebration, and there was none. And they didn't know what to do. They'd come back from this war, and it says in verse 3 that they stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. Like they know that this is not good news for the king, so they can't even rejoice that they survived. Like, I made it, and now I'm supposed to feel guilty for actually making it because David's son died. So we can imagine this, right? I mean, this is what happened in Vietnam, right? Our troops were overseas, and they came back to a bunch of people who were saying, you shouldn't have been there in the first place, and this, that, and the other thing, and they were not celebrated as heroes. They almost had to slink back into their homes and just kind of like forget about the war altogether. What might have been the fact that I have survived and I fought for my country became almost this blemish, this embarrassment that I was even part of this. This is not good for the morale of troops. So Joab in verse 4, the king covered his face and cried aloud, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." He's still crying, like he is weeping and wailing for some considerable time, and everybody can hear him. And this is not good for the morale of the troops. Verse 5, then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all of your men. They have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and the concubines, and you don't care. All you care about is your son Absalom, who they went and fought for you against. You love those who hate you, you hate those who love you, and you have made it clear today that the commanders and all of their men mean nothing to you because you're crying over the enemy. Now go out." Oh, sorry. I see now that you would have been pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. This is significant, right? And we, again, encounter this in our society. People who have fought, who've signed up, who have asked to sacrifice for their lives, and somehow they are made to feel like they didn't matter. When you lose the morale of the troops, you've already lost the war, says Sun Tzu in The Art of War, the handbook of strategy. Morale is the number one piece that you need for any team to win, whether it's an army or whether it's your team at work. If morale goes bad, everything goes bad. And Joab says to David right to his face, "You're not going to do this. You are not going to affect the people who are trying to serve under your command by you weeping and moaning. No. There has to be a different way. You need to inspire your troops, not make them feel ashamed." Now go out, verse 7, and encourage your men, for I swear by the Lord that if you do not go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This is David, who was able to attract all kinds of great warriors. They are ready to leave, pack up and go home, because obviously David no longer cares about them. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on from you from your youth until now. Now, there's a lot of calamities that David has had to suffer through. This, Joab says, will even be far greater. So the king got up in verse 8, took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. They were still loyal to David. It didn't matter the country. They wanted to see David, and as soon as they saw him, that's the guy. That's our man. We're going to fight for him. Which reminds me of the strategy that sometimes you have to fake it. Sometimes you have to put your personal feelings aside and just be there for the people who need encouragement. So many times we get wrapped up in our own stuff and we forget that we have to fake it. Now, if you're faking it all the time, there's a real problem. But there are times where it calls for you to stop moaning and complaining, and I'm talking to myself here, and lead people with passion and consider all that they do for us. Sometimes you have to fake it to inspire the troops. That's where we're going to end tonight, as David will begin to return to Jerusalem. We'll get into a little bit of that in 2 weeks. We will be not meeting next week. I have surgery, nasal surgery, this Friday, so I'm not sure I'll be recovered by Wednesday or not. It's possible that that's true, but I don't want to try to rush anything. So we will then be meeting the week after that, and hopefully on that date we will finish up 2 Samuel altogether, and then we'll have another 2 to 3 week hiatus, because Amy and I will be on furlough, and then coming back on September 23rd, we will be maybe September 23rd, maybe it's the September 30th. We'll be meeting together for our continued Bible studies together. Thank you for walking through the scriptures with us. May God bless you, and may sometimes put on a good face of joy, because people need to see you at your best. God bless you, and have a great night.